Welcome back to World History with Dustin Fowler. Today we're going to talk about another ancient civilization, the Greeks. Now there's a lot to be said about the Greek civilization, so we're going to break it out into several parts. First talking about ancient Greek Mycenaean civilization, then moving on talk about the golden age of Athens and how they influenced us in terms of the arts through drama and literature and politics. Better prepare yourself, we're going to do the Greeks. First thing we need to do is talk about the geography of the Greeks, and they're situated on a geographic area known as the Balkan Peninsula. Now today, if you look at that area, it seems very much like there might be peninsulas or islands sprinkled all around that, but basically if you look at the area known as the Balkan Peninsula, it does in fact have water surrounding it on three sides. It's situated just to the east of Italian Peninsula, where the Roman Empire, in just a few years after the Greek civilization, would become the predominant civilization throughout the Mediterranean. The Greeks can be considered to be a group of people who were around the sea. What I mean by this is that they were so dependent upon the sea to live their lives that it can be compared to the importance of the rivers to the earlier river valley civilizations we discussed. Now it's also worth noting that this is an example of human-environment interaction to the fullest extent. This is an example of people being able to adapt to meet the needs of themselves using the geography to their advantage. If you look at the Balkan Peninsula on a physical map, you're going to see there's mountains all over the place. I mean, it's a very mountainous area. The Greeks didn't depend upon travel across the land because the land was very rocky and mountainous. Rather, the mountains divided the Greeks from one another. What they did was, in order to interact with the area around them, they traveled along the sea. So they were very much seamen, and they were very dependent upon. Also, if you look at the way the geography was set apart, is there was a lot of different island groups, and so in order to get from one place to another, you have to be able to traverse the high seas. Since there isn't really a whole lot of land that they can actually live on, the population never really grew, and it also never really grew because you can't produce a huge amount of crops on mountains. And so therefore, these guys aren't going to be major food producers, and their populations are never going to be equal to that which you might see in like the Persian Empire, for example, or in some other empires that dominated the Middle East. Finally, it's worth noting that another part of the geography factoring into this would be the climate. The area is very, very mild. It's very relatively warm winters, livable, bearable summers, which encourage a lot of outdoor life, which kind of coincides with their willingness to jump on a boat and go anywhere, or their interaction with one another, or their focus on outdoor activities, which is also another big thing with these Greek civilizations. The earliest civilization to inhabit the Balkan Peninsula and be known as Greeks would have been the Greek Mycenaeans. These guys could have lived in the area as early as 3000 BCE, and they were very much a warrior king-led group of people. Now, we're going to learn also a little bit about the Greek polis, which is a city-state. It's the same concept as what you would have seen in Mesopotamia. Each different city or area within the Greeks, even though they shared the same basic characteristics of their culture and can all be considered to be Greeks or all be considered to be Mycenaeans, these guys were led by individual kings and had individual gods and whatnot that would help one king more than another. If you don't believe me about this, watch the movie Troy, which is a retelling, very great movie, but retelling of Homer's The Iliad. It definitely paints a clear picture of the type of warrior king society that they will have had going on. The Greeks were really more rivals than they would have been on the same side. Despite their warrior orientation, these guys did do trade, and they would have explored a lot of areas within the Mediterranean. It's said that they will have done trade with the Minoan civilization as well, and that the two of those civilizations combined their culture to form the cornerstone of Western civilization. The Mycenaeans had their own common language, they had their own writing system, and a very strong trade-oriented economy. But it wasn't to last very long. The Mycenaeans actually were toppled by a series of invaders and were replaced by a group of descendants from the Bronze Age Greeks known as the Dorians. Now, the Dorians were not nearly as advanced as Mycenaeans. So this was a classic example of what happened in Europe during the Middle Ages. In fact, the Dorians had no written system, and so we lose sight of the records, and so therefore some people call this period the Greek Dark Ages. However, all wasn't lost. This is also the time period that historians believe that Homer would have compiled his epic poems, the Iliad and the Odyssey. The Iliad telling about the story of the Trojan War, and the Odyssey telling about the story of one of the generals, Odysseus, king of Ithaca, on his path back home from the Trojan War. These two epic poems tell us a lot about the culture and the richness of the Greek civilization. It emphasizes a characteristic known as arete, which is kind of like this characteristic of being great, the embodiment of doing outrageously awesome things or being completely brave. The very same characteristics that make up the basis of our modern day epics like Spider-Man or Superman or Harry Potter. Since the Dorians had no written system, a lot of these stories, including the ones by Homer, the Iliad and the Odyssey, were told through the oral tradition. In other words, these things were memorized by poets that would travel around and tell these stories over and over. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, dang, how boring is this? I mean, these guys lived before Wi-Fi, y'all. They lived before you could go to the movie theaters. At night, they probably laid out by a campfire and counted the stars and studied astronomy. But by day, if they wanted some degree of entertainment, you would listen to these storytellers tell these stories about all sorts of things that, including the stories of the Iliad and the Odyssey. While we're talking about the Iliad, I figured I would go ahead and preface the story of the Trojan War. But what's going on here is you've got the Queen of Sparta, Helen of Troy, said to be descended from the gods because of her amazing beauty that was unrivaled by anyone else. Side note, Sparta is said to have the hottest women in the land because there's so much focus on physical fitness, and their women were tough and rugged and extremely beautiful. The king of Sparta, Menelaus, was married to Helen, and Helen was promised to a prince of Troy, whose name was Paris, by the goddess Aphrodite, who put Paris in a situation to determine which was the most beautiful of three Olympian goddesses. When he chose Aphrodite on account of the fact that she promised him marriage to the world's most beautiful woman, the Spartans didn't like the idea that Paris took Helen back home with him and assembled an alliance of Greeks that went across the Aegean Sea to wage war against the Trojans. Now, the walls of Troy, said to be built by the gods, were so impenetrable that the Greeks in all their strength were camped out on the beaches of Troy for 10 solid years before they were able to trick their way inside by using the Trojan Horse. You guys have surely all heard of this. It was left to them as a gift by the god Poseidon, and the Greeks had left the beaches looking as though they had retreated. But they put some of the finest warriors, including Achilles and Odysseus, inside the Trojan Horse. And after the Trojans partied the night away, these dudes slipped out through the bottom of the horse and ended up killing off the military and a lot of the royals, and ended up basically defeating Troy by using that level of trickery. Reality of the Trojan War is still debatable. Many historians say there was obviously some kind of a war between these groups. Others say, well, they just did trade with these groups. Nevertheless, it's hard to take away the elements of mythology from the facts that could be the war between Troy and the Greeks, due to the fact that, well, when you're listening to this retelling and you're talking about Athena and Apollo and Zeus and all these different gods and goddesses, they get directly involved and show themselves to these mythical heroes. I mean, Achilles was said to be a demigod. It's difficult to understand what's truth and what's fiction. The Greeks were very much a polytheistic group in the same way that most civilizations at the time were polytheistic. They believed that certain gods had certain powers over certain elements. In other words, their belief in these gods helped them to explain the otherwise unexplainable. One of the most powerful forces on earth would have been lightning, and so therefore the most powerful weapon that Zeus could possibly have ever wielded would have been a lightning bolt, so strong it helped him to overthrow the Titan. Still, water was increasingly important to the gods as well, and so it would make sense that Zeus's brother and the second most powerful of the gods would be Poseidon, who also had command over earthquakes. And still, when you die, most people believe that you would have something beyond. You can't just die and not exist anymore. And so they believed that their spirit would go on and live in the underworld, which was reserved for everyone. But some people might have had a little bit better based on their life and their prestige, maybe than others. But Hades, another brother of Poseidon and Zeus, was the one who controlled that. And since he lived under the earth, they believed that he also controlled all of the minerals and rocks and precious metals. And so he was also considered to be the god of wealth. As cool as the Mycenaean civilization was, and as awesome as everything has been so far, and how much of their culture was derived from this age, the good stuff doesn't really start to happen until you look at the Golden Age, in particular, the Golden Age of Athens. Stay tuned for the next video. We're going to talk about Athens, we're going to talk a little bit about Sparta, and we're going to learn a little bit more about how the Greeks really did form the basis of Western culture. I hope you enjoyed the video. Like, subscribe, share, tell people about me. See you next time.